This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
PTBN Play.
What?
Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of PTBN Play on the PTBN Pop feed here at Place to Be Nation. This is Brad and I've got Jordan with me today. Jordan, how are you?
I'm doing great as always.
And we are continuing our top 4 Game Struck 4 stretch through our history with console video games. And so we are up to today the Nintendo 64. We have made it to the 64-bit era. Neither of us had a Jaguar, nor felt it was worth spending any time on that. If you did, you must have been very well off wealthy-wise, or you're made a terrible choice. But
or the opposite, yes.
You had one chance and you chose poorly. And
right.
So here we are with the 64-bit era, and so we, last time out we talked about the PlayStation and some of the timing around when these consoles came out and when we had them. And so I was a PlayStation guy at the end of '97, even though it had been out for 2 years. And so the Nintendo 64 launched in the U.S. in the end of September in 1996. So there it was for holiday '96. And so Jordan, when did you first see the system and your first kind of initial impressions, and then when you picked it up?
So, I was trying to figure out exactly what year and time I got this based off of when I got my PlayStation and stuff. I know for a fact that I had it when I graduated high school, and I know that I got it for Christmas. So that would mean I had to have gotten it for Christmas in '96.
Yeah, so you got it at release, essentially.
Yep, basically. And what's funny is I don't remember really having a great desire for the system or asking my parents for it. I think it was maybe a case of, I was a high school kid and I was asking for nothing for Christmas, like give me money.
Right.
And they knew I liked video games, so they got me the new video game system. Because I don't remember really thinking, oh, there's a new Nintendo coming out. Awesome. I'm glad that they got it for me, though, because as we talked about in our PlayStation episode, I have much more affinity and a lot more connection with the N64 than I do the PlayStation 1. So I think they made the right choice. Maybe they knew me better than I knew myself in my angsty junior year of high school.
Yes, and that was kind of the, your senior year, right? You were graduating in 97.
I guess we were starting my senior year.
Started your senior year. So, and it was the new hotness at the time, right? So you'll see some comparisons to those kind of hard-to-get holiday toys. And, of course, Nintendo, we all know this with the Switch when it first came out, and the Wii, especially is, it's hard to get a hold of. So they were, it was the new hotness, and they did you right there, because it was not an easy thing to get at initially at launch. Right. And the system itself only launched with 2 games, Pilot Wings and Super Mario 64.
Yep.
And so that's I read some quotes, and I had listened to a couple different shows before on the launch itself, and I know that they wanted to get away from third-party stuff, although they still use them, but they didn't want to have like a lot of junk out there. But this is going to be the smallest console release you'll ever see when it comes to games on there. Even the Wii U and other things like that had it well beat here. So just 2 games initially, and then in the coming months up to the holiday, there were some other ones that were released, but nothing really good. And that kind of hurt the system a little bit, because into '97 there really wasn't anything else coming out for it that were big names until we get to some of the ones we're going to talk about later on.
Right. Now that explains one of my honorable mentions, and I have it listed, and I'm sitting there thinking, why do I always think of this game? Probably because there wasn't that many out.
Yeah.
Well, I'll share which that one is when we get there. But
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my experience with the system was, so I had a different friend who had one, and so I saw it in like the spring of '97. I don't remember seeing it at launch. I remember how easy it was to kind of like bring to your friend's house, which seems weird like now, of course, you're not like, I'm going to pack my PS4 up, and connect it up and all that stuff. But it was easy to move, and I remember like my buddy even just bringing it over and like playing Mario 64 at my house too. And so we had that, and well, I didn't have it. He had that, and I remember playing NBA Hang Time on it, and a couple other games, kind of as like we were graduating high school. So I was still kind of doing the Genesis thing and playing PC games. So, but obviously the system, certainly I was attracted to it with a couple different things that we're going to talk about. But I don't think I got one until my brother had got one, maybe for Christmas in '98. And then we had one in the house for like the spring of '99. So, yeah,
we kind of flipped. The two of us kind of flipped with PS1 and N64. So
yep, friends had it, but I did not have it initially until then later on. But I did play a lot of it. So, and there was a lot of reasons why we played with friends with the system. And I think I'm going to just get into it right now. Is of course the built-in 4 controllers was a huge deal. And so a lot of the games on our list are going to be talking about how they utilize those. And it was just, I mean, I'm sure controllers were expensive, but it was easy to bring your own over, and it was kind of just built in. I played a lot of multiplayer on PC around this time too, but there was just kind of like an ease of being able to play on the Nintendo 64 and have a 4-player split screen and just have it be good, and so
yeah.
All right.
Let's talk about that controller for a second.
Yeah, sure.
What are your thoughts on the N64 controller? Do you remember your first thoughts on it, and did they change over time? Because I think it's a very unique controller in gaming history.
Unique is a nice word for it. I don't think it's going to make the tops of like any lists when it comes to, I wouldn't say comfort, but even just kind of like ease of use. So of course they have these C buttons for this camera because in some of the games, namely their games, the camera works fairly well, like Mario 64. So you have this camera and you're like, that's really weird, right? And then the 2 buttons and the Z button underneath. So I think for games like Mario Kart and stuff, it was cool because you didn't have to hold it on the far edge. You could hold it underneath where the Z button was and then just use your fingers for the other buttons. So that was pretty comfortable. But when it came to like, just mapping different buttons to different things, like the C buttons were just weird. And, it got slightly better with GameCube, which we'll talk about down the line. But yeah, it was, it certainly, I think it created probably a barrier to some games too, multi-platform wise, on what you'd really want to pick up there.
Yeah, it was overwhelming to look at. I mean, it almost seemed like some buttons were thrown on just to throw a couple more on, Like you have the D-pad and the analog stick, and it's just, I remember that was one of my first thoughts of it was, what is this thing? Looking at that remote. It was like a PlayStation remote with a penis, almost. For lack of a better description.
that analog stick was ahead of its time because PlayStation didn't put out their analog controller.
That wasn't out originally.
Until, a couple years in. It came out, I guess it was right around like the fall of '97, which we harped on last time. That's when they came out with their analog controller. And
now, of course, that's pretty much all we use with gaming.
But it's good to still have it. There are some
D-pad
D-pad reasons with 2D games and whatnot where you may, prefer that. But Nintendo was the first one to have it come packed in with it. And again, the Ultra 64 was out in Japan since '95, so they've been doing it for a long time. But again, different games used different ways. There certainly were a lot of options, I guess would be a nice way to do it. You had your 2 shoulder buttons again, the 4 C buttons on the side. And then the A and B button and the Z button like a trigger underneath. So
I almost wonder too. You mentioned the 4 ports, and it was easy to just bring your own remote over. This is the first system I remember buying like a custom colored remote for, which is now a thing. You go to Target now and you see PS4 remotes. You have your standard black, but you can buy silver, camo, gold, all different colors. I remember having the red N64 remote, as well as kind of like it was green, but you could see inside and see the circuitry and stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had and now I'm looking to see where they are.
I definitely don't remember that with prior systems at all.
No, that was definitely a new thing. I'm glad you brought that up. I remember, the gray came packed in initially, and I had we had a green and a red one too. I remember that. I
feel like everybody had a red one. I wonder if there was something to it, to where red came with something and we're just forgetting.
I don't know. That's a good point. And I know later on they made a whole bunch of we'll talk about it now. They made a whole bunch of different colored systems too. So that translucent,
Yep.
they made like an aqua blue one, and I actually have that. I bought it a couple years ago. So I have my gray one, and then I also have this aqua blue one that came with like the aqua blue controller. So you could really kind of you could dazzle it out, I guess, right? Yeah, I remember the orange one.
That is sharp, man. Yeah. Aqua blue's good color.
Yeah.
Cool.
And now, so the system came packed, just the system. So you had to buy Mario 64 separate. That was a new thing. What other bundles do you remember coming out? Because this console, even for its life, maybe let's say in the U.S. like 5 years or so.
Sure.
They certainly, there were big things coming out with Pokemon and different things like that. What other bundles do you remember being out there?
There was a Pokemon Stadium bundle, which I do remember. My mind deceives me a little bit because I was convinced there was an Ocarina of Time bundle, but as I look at our best-selling list that I have brought up, it is not marked as ever being bundled with the N64, which would have fooled me. I would have been convinced of that. But of course, GoldenEye was a bundle as well. GoldenEye was maybe one of the most successful games in terms of selling and popularity and even impact from the N64 system. And there's two more, actually, that I don't remember, but since I have the list in front of me, I could tell you. Do you want to take a stab at it?
I think one is Donkey Kong.
Yep. The other one I don't know that you would think of. You're going to have to think of the time period. 1999 is all I'll give you.
Okay. Let's see here.
And think movies and things like that.
Okay, so you're not talking first party here. That's interesting.
No. Yeah. And when I say it, it'll make sense.
Go ahead. What is it?
It was Star Wars Episode 1 Race.
Yeah.
Which, of course, that makes total sense that they would bundle a Star Wars game in with the N64 with the release of Episode 1.
Sure.
And that wasn't until '99, so a couple years into the system.
Yeah, I remember the Pokemon Nintendo 64. You talked about the pack-in. Was Stadium with the one that was shaped had like Pikachu on the system?
I bet you it had to.
Yeah, that one goes for a little bit of money nowadays if you're holding on to that one. There's some efficient, especially if you have the box and stuff like that. There's some collectors out there with that one. There are a lot of variants for the system, which you don't see, with PlayStation.
No, not at all.
Or anything like that. So
What's funny is I was not a Pokemon guy at all, but that console was like blue and yellow, so Michigan Wolverines fan in me was like, ooh, that's really cool.
Sure. Yeah, I guess we can maybe talk about Pokemon right now. So you and I being, when did that come out? Like 99, 98? 99?
I mean, that's the games. The card games came out before that.
Yeah. I was, 18 and 19, so it had passed me by. I remember working summer jobs at camps where kids were super into it, and I was just like, I'm not saying that everybody that age in your late teens or whatever would, not that you couldn't like Pokemon, but it was just kind of passed me by. It wasn't something that I was interested in at that stage.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I feel like just missed me. Like if I was, 3 or 4 years younger, maybe I'd know a lot more about it. I do know pretty well the first couple generations of Pokemon from Pokemon Go.
Okay.
Oh, the mobile game. And my boys grew up on it. I remember telling my wife, Pokemon was the first thing they were ever into that I did not know.
Okay.
They're into superheroes. Oh, cool, I know superheroes. They're into wrestling. I know wrestling. They're into sports. I know sports. And then they start liking these dragons with antlers and all this weird stuff. And I'm like, ask Mom about that.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, so that was the console. That was the controller. And there was a Rumble pack for it, too, that you could plug in.
Yep.
That was something new to market also. It did come out built into the PlayStation 1 controllers a little bit later on. And it had the memory card that you could snap in the back, too. Not a lot of room on that memory card. I remember having a third-party one, too, that was pretty expanded. As we were, but some of the games just used the cart anyway. So it was hit or miss. It's a weird thing about the system where it was some wrote right to the cartridge, which was an interesting choice itself, right? So we're into the days of discs and CDs and whatnot, and Nintendo decided, of course, to stick with the cartridge one last time. And we talked in our PlayStation episode about how Square and other companies didn't like that limitation and went exclusive with PlayStation. But Nintendo, they stuck with that cartridge for one more time. Probably a little bit too long. You can read
Yeah.
about that elsewhere, for sure.
Right.
But they did.
Well,
some pretty
we see
interesting
the
things.
limitations on it. Yeah, we see the limitations on it because they released the expansion. Was it the expansion
Yeah, it was called the
pack?
expansion pack. I think it was called like a jump pack in Japan.
Yeah, it was required to play certain games.
Yeah. It
because
came with
otherwise you
with
didn't have the
Donkey Kong
memory.
64 because the system needed the memory boost, and that's a really weird thing. I was actually fortunate. I have one in each of mine, because they can be a little bit pricey now and finding them too. There were knockoffs
bet.
and stuff, but I'm not sure they always worked great. But yeah, you needed that, and then for a game we're going to talk about later on, I mean, you really needed it for some of the later games in the system to be able to kind of keep up and keep chugging. So.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so that is the a little bit of the history around the console, and now we're going to get into our experiences, and let's start with our top 4. And Jordan, what is your number 4?
Okay, so my number 4 is a game that I think, I bet it's number 1 on a lot of people's lists, actually. In fact, my friend Eric, who I know listens to all of these episodes because he has texted me asking where they are when we take too long to drop them.
You're doing pretty good.
He
for
told
what it's
me
worth.
that this, he told me this is his number 1 game of all time, not
Okay.
just for the N64.
Interesting.
I went with Super Mario 64 as my number 4 entry. And to give you guys a little peek behind the curtain, Brad and I usually we don't compare lists. We don't know what our lists are going in. We actually kind of don't talk about it until we're sitting here recording. This is the first time where I've actually kind of shared a little bit about my lists before we went on air, where I was messaging you yesterday, I think, and I was like, Mario 64 might not make my list and feel blasphemous doing it. And it's not because I don't like Mario. It's funny. This is our third Nintendo system we talked about. This is the first Mario game that I've ranked. But this game is incredible. And the fact that it's number 4, to me, speaks to my connection with the N64 more than Mario 64 is not a good game, because this game was incredible.
Yeah.
One of the first 3D platformer games, and I don't know that they really got better than this one, even though it was one of the first. I don't really know what to say, because I'm trying to think of what to say that other people who's listening to this and doesn't know all about Mario.
Sure.
64.
I think it's worth pointing out again too. So here's another example from Nintendo of a launch title that ends up being like the best game on the system even 5 years later, because they just know how to make games. So this game is it's number 1 on my list.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Eric, I'm with you, and to the other listeners out there. And so it's number 1 on my list for a couple. I'm going to talk about it right now, and maybe so we'll just talk about it now. I think it's the first game ever that I would say is like from a spectating standpoint. Like, I can remember like my mom watching us play and just sit back and just watch, because it was open. You went around, you went into different worlds, you could accomplish different things within the world, and you get your star. And there was just nothing like it before. And I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but I still think it holds up. And I just remember beating it, pretty sure I did, and kind of getting all the stars to get up to it. And that, well, again, as I talked about on the Super Nintendo show a couple episodes back, that I had not played Super Mario World, this was one where I jumped back in and I was kind of on board with Mario from there on. Yeah, I think it's one of the best games ever. It's certainly probably in my top 5 favorite games ever. Although not one I've revisited much lately, but yeah, just the 3D world and the cameras and everything. Everything was so crisp. The controls were unbelievable, and a lot of other games would try to do that and fail. So
yeah, and this is a game that's, I mean, we aren't necessarily ranking best games. Otherwise, it might be my number 1, might be my number 2. There's another one I'll talk about that I think I like a little bit more, but I mean, just universally loved.
Right. We're talking about games that defined it for us. So this one, that's why it's number 1 for me, because it defines the early part of the system for me, and that kind of, like, that was the first time, like, my parents were ever, like, watching me play, and like, oh, this is cool, and so that was, they weren't really into Madden 94 updates, but they were cool with Mario 64, so.
And I think, too, it's not even just that it's Mario. It being Mario helps. But if anything, I think I would be the type of guy who might handicap a game because it's Mario. Because I feel like the earlier Mario games are a little too easy, like the Nintendo games and stuff. Sure. And this one was, even though, like you said, you got all the stars, but it was tough.
Yep.
You know, there was some challenge to it. You know, winning the race against down the slide and things like that. There was some real tricky stuff that frustrated you. Wanted to throw your giant 3-foot skateboard length controller across the room.
It had good replay value though with that though.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. Yeah. You wanted to go back and do it again. I mean, that's a game like that you would go back and beat from the start multiple times. So, but if we're to your number one, we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get there too. But yeah, like I said, I struggled with where to put this, and I'll explain how it got on the list when I get higher on my list. And I'll let you know what got bumped.
Okay.
So.
All right. So my number 4 is I've kind of, you know, we talk about games defining. I had a hard time. This is maybe the hardest time I've had with kind of ranking them, putting them in an order to me, because of obviously our affection for wrestling games is going to come out, and we're going to talk about that today. And so it was hard to rank that because when I played, as we talked about in the PlayStation episode, I certainly had a lot of experience. I played a ton of PlayStation. And when I played Nintendo, it was really for first-party games or wrestling games. That was it. Sports games, no way. Like, they weren't as good.
Right.
EA Sports weren't good. There were some games I would say, like, if you only had a Nintendo 64, and there were games like All-Star Baseball that were, like, only were made by Acclaim for the Nintendo 64, like, they were fine. But like if it was a game like Triple Play, like I was playing that on the PlayStation, not on the Nintendo 64.
Yeah, and I think that still holds true with current consoles.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, yes, it has a great point. I would even say going back to the Super Nintendo, it did too. So it's still kind of like not your first choice for sports games, no doubt. So my number 4 then is Mario Golf, and I would say this is probably my favorite golf game of all time. So we were really into golf games in like the late 90s. So we played a lot of, I don't even know if it was Tiger yet. I remember the game Cyber Tiger, which is a weird name, for the PlayStation. It was kind of like this too. And so Mario Golf was kind of it was cartoony because it was big Mario characters, but it was an amazing golf engine that Camelot made. And they made the GameCube game and the Game Boy Advance games they're very well received. They've rated very highly. And so, I like golf, liked Mario, and I love this game because there were a ton of unlockables, right? And so we'll talk about it a little bit later on with the wrestling games too. And so you kind of had that, like, oh, I'm going to win this tournament because now I'm going to unlock, you know, the Bugos or whatever. I don't even remember who they were. But that was a motivator, right, for replay value back then. That was one thing. If you wanted to suck me into a game, it was, this is the one game you have, and there's like all these unlockables, and figure out how to unlock them so you have like the open, complete game. You know, the full roster. And so that was one way to hook me. And so Mario Golf was, and so this is another game too where, so I had roommates in college, and I mean, like, we were all into sports and stuff, but let's say, like, Mario probably wasn't, like, maybe the coolest thing, but, like, we all played Mario Golf, even though we could play, like, Tiger Woods Golf or PGA Tour 98 or whatever it was out there, too. But it was a great engine, and we played that game quite a bit, and I remember getting it pre-owned at, like, a Blockbuster at college, and I still have it. And it is certainly one that I have a lot of great memories on it. And it's one, too, where, so then I got the GameCube games, and I've gotten some other ones since then that came out for, like, the 3DS, I guess, right? They haven't put, like, a console one out in a while. Tennis, they've leaned more towards. But I've actually never really played any of the other ones besides this one.
Oh, gosh. You mean any Mario sports games at all?
No, I just mean, like, in the golf series. I just stuck with this one.
Because I was going to say, as you're talking, I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, Mario has a pretty extensive sports lineup that's really, really good.
That should be an offshoot time. I tried to collect most of them, just because, again, they're first-party Nintendo and they're sports, so they're fun for party-wise. But, yeah, I think when we get to the GameCube, we may talk about some of them, and the Wii, too. They did pretty well.
Thinking ahead to the Wii, there's a couple that I really, really enjoy. So this game, I did not own, but I remember specifically renting it more than once. And I think something you touched on is what explains a couple of my entries ahead of Mario. And you said playing it with your friends, which a lot of my memories of Nintendo 64 are sitting around my buddies and we're out of high school at this point, so we're up all night long playing N64 games. This was not one that we had. I don't know anyone that had it, but I do remember we rented it a couple times, enjoyed it, and Mario sports games are a lot of fun. I'm sure, like you said, some people may be turned off by the cartoony nature of them. If you're looking for like a realistic sports game,
Right.
Yes, of course not. But if you're looking for fun games, I don't know that there's any Mario sports games that I would not recommend.
Sure.
And that's, of course, including Mario Kart as a sport as well, which, of course, is by far the most successful and most famous. But there's a lot more. There's Mario Sluggers Baseball. There's Mario Super Strikers Soccer. I want to say there's a volleyball game, too. I might be wrong.
That may be in like the sports mix. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, and then they've got, the Mario and Sonic at the Olympics and stuff, which that's where I think it takes a dip for me. But when it's just got Mario's name attached to it and it's a sport, it's probably a good game.
Nintendo certainly takes care of their properties like
Sure.
that. And I actually would say that even though it is arcadey, it still has all the elements that you look for in a golf game.
Yep.
Wind,
Yep.
weather, slice, like where you hit the
Even where you hit the ball.
where you hit the
yeah.
ball. Like, I mean, that's why we related and jumped in on it, because it's like, this is a great golf game, and we're playing on these really weird courses. I mean, we played a lot of golf video games. Like, I was starting to kind of like draw those memories back. I talked about Cyber Tiger on the PlayStation. It was the same thing. It was like big head, like cartoony, but still like your regular golf engine and kind of quirky golf. And that was pretty popular game-wise back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
And as you mentioned, that there is one thing that I thought of that I do remember was a deciding factor sometimes in what game we played, where the N64 always won out, is there's no load time. When we go to PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, you're playing some games where the load screens, you're sitting there for a while.
Yeah, that was the one benefit of the cartridge, right? Was that it did not have load
You turned
times.
it on, it was good to go.
Yeah,
yeah.
That was it.
So, but yeah, Mario Golf, good pick, man.
All right, thank you. How about your number 3?
Sure. One last question,
Yes, sir.
though. Who was your go-to golfer?
I can't remember. I want to say, I don't think it was Peach. It may have been Mario. It can be a bit of a traditionalist there.
Mario's usually the best all-around.
Yeah, so I think I
stat.
stuck with him because I was trying to like unlock things, so I needed like the all-around character, not like the well, I'm going to play as Donkey Kong because he can hit it the farthest, but I got to sacrifice other
drive
stuff.
it the hardest. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
That's a great question though. I have to fire that one back up.
Yeah, then you always got those weirdos who go with Luigi no matter what. So. Those people are not welcome on this show. Anyways, my number 3 is a game that I think is synonymous with the Nintendo 64. I mentioned just a minute ago about how a lot of my memories are spending time with friends and playing with them, and this is a game that I think most people who played the N64 played this with their buddies with all 4 remotes, all 4 screens going at once, and it's GoldenEye. Now, this is a game that, if you have fond memories of it and you think back on how great it was, I would encourage you not to go back and play it again, because I made that mistake a couple years ago and thought, wow, this is not good. So it hasn't aged well, but the memories have. GoldenEye, first-person shooter, and I'm not even a big first-person shooter fan. I probably won't rank a first-person shooter throughout any of our lists outside of this one game, which I think does speak to how much fun this was. But GoldenEye, again, is a game that everybody who knows N64 knows it. It's the number 3 top-selling game of all time on the system. It's a James Bond game. And the biggest appeal was the 4-player mode where you could play with your friends, you pick the different levels, you pick the scenarios, you pick your weapons, and you just played all night long trying to kill each other. I will say this, though. That's what everybody remembers. The actual campaign mode was pretty darn good on GoldenEye.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot. And it was one of the, maybe not one of the first games, but one of the first I remember where you could beat the level, but there was stuff left undone. You would get like tasks, 3 or 4 tasks, and you didn't have to do all of them to beat the level, but if you did all of them, you could unlock, what was I think it was Egypt was like the hidden level that was really hard to get. But yeah, GoldenEye is one that I don't really rank for the campaign mode, even though it was a nice, kind of like the icing on the cake. I rank it because I spent countless nights staying up all night long with my friends, playing to the point where we had specific rules, like you were not allowed to play as Odd Job when we played 4-player because he was too hard to hit, and if you took him and then ducked, he was impossible to hit. So Odd Job was just off the table for us. How about you? Do you have GoldenEye?
Yeah, so GoldenEye is number 3 on my list too, and
Okay,
I think it's real
cool.
important from a defining scope of what you think about the system that it almost has to be on there. And we've talked in previous shows about how licensed games can be hit or miss, and so here's Rare, a company that we're all pretty familiar with, and they just do a bang up job on this. And I played kind of deathmatch games on the PC. But this is the first one on a console that was, again, the 4-player split screen where you could do that. And then you're in college, and this is an incredibly popular game. I was trying to draw back to different memories that I had, and I couldn't remember anything like yours per se. I mean, I know that we played it. I don't remember really ever playing the single-player campaign, although I have heard that it is quite challenging, like you said, and there's unlockables to it.
It is. It's tough.
And when I fired up my Game Shark earlier today, my brother must have had like 18 GoldenEye codes in there because it asked if I want to apply them to not GoldenEye that I was playing. But so I know he played it a lot too, and so I think it has to be on there, and so I definitely put it on as my number 3 here. And
I remember some of those codes. There was paintball mode.
Yeah, there was cool stuff in there.
There was infinite ammo. I don't think it was a code, but I think it was just an option you could pick was golden gun, which whoever had the golden gun, one hit killed you. So that was like the least favorite mode,
Yeah.
So
yeah. And so they tried to recreate that game too, right? But it's hard. So the next Bond license game comes out, it's not going to be the same. And I remember on the Wii, and I'll raise my hand that I actually haven't played them, but they released games called like GoldenEye, and they essentially they redid it, right?
Yep. Yeah, it wasn't good.
It wasn't good? I thought there was one that was good, though. Like, there were different...
See, I think what I didn't like about it was picture playing GoldenEye with a Wiimote.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's fair. You couldn't play as a classic controller or anything like that?
Well, I didn't have one, so I'm sure you could, but I didn't have one at the time.
Yeah, because the Wii, as we'll get to then, too, is some of the regular peripherals, like the classic controller stuff, they were pretty good. If so, you just didn't have to deal with that. You just had to plug it into the Wiimote. You didn't have to deal with that stuff, so...
I almost wonder if the sequel, which was The World Is Not Enough, that was not made by Rare.
No.
And I wonder if that's why
it
doesn't have the same...
Do you remember the Wii release? I remember on the Racket Boy community, which for retro gaming I was a part of, I remember they had a lot of multiplayer nights where they played that game a lot. So I want to say that the multiplayer they recreated to hold up well.
Pretty well.
And so that was a selling point for me, and of course I did not play it. But I have it, and so maybe I may have to revisit that one too. But I do think that really speaks to its legacy also. And
sure.
I'm not surprised to hear it's a number 3 game of all time. And you think about what had to happen word of mouth and review wise for this game, because you look at it or you're just like, oh wow, it's a movie game. Probably stinks.
Yeah.
And nope, it was.
And even like me, I wasn't a James Bond fan either.
Yeah, I didn't see the movie until years later. I don't think.
Same here.
I had no interest in the movie, so.
Yeah. And even just to speak that we're ranking games off of our own personal impact, there was a game that came later that a lot of people kind of considered a sequel of sorts that I think was a better game, and that's Perfect Dark.
Yeah, so that was Rare. Yeah, that was that's a good thing. Maybe we could segue and talk a little bit about that. Not on my list.
Sure.
I haven't played it too much, but yeah, I would say that's a game that got remade because again, it didn't have the license. That was probably the biggest holdup, right?
Yep.
That was a game that was remade even for the 360, and it was on that Rare collection for the Xbox One. So yeah, that was a pretty good game, kind of from a campaign standpoint. And again, it had the 4-player deathmatch too.
Yeah, and I really do think that game was better than GoldenEye, but it just doesn't have the history. No. It doesn't have that connection.
But you're right.
So many people have with it.
You know what? I never played that game multiplayer. Now that I think about it,
I don't know that I did either. I remember the single player mode, and I really enjoyed it, but I don't remember. I'm sure that I did, but I just don't remember.
Yeah.
So either way, GoldenEye is both our number 3s.
So that was both our number 3s, and as you guys are starting to garner here, as we've kind of tipped our hand with different things, this is a hard list to put together with just 4. There are some games that were defined on this system that may not make our list, but we're going to talk about them eventually.
Oh yeah, there's there's definitely some big ones that are going to be left off.
So let's hear about your number 2 and see where that conversation goes.
So my number 1, 2, and 3, this has probably been the hardest ranking I've done for any system yet, because including GoldenEye, any of the 3 that I'm going to talk about now could have been my number 1. And even Mario, which was my number 4, I knew that wouldn't be my number 1, but it's so many people's number 1, including yours. So when it came to 1 and 2, it was really tough for me. Do I go with what I spent the most time at the time, or over history what I spent the most time on? So what I went with is, for my number 2, the game that I played the most at the time. I believe this is the best game for the Nintendo 64, and I went with the Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda, as my number 2. If you've listened to all these episodes, you've got to know that I'm a Zelda fan. I have ranked The Legend of Zelda, I've ranked Link to the Past, and now I've ranked Ocarina of Time as 1, 2, and 2 for their respective systems. In fact, after doing our Super Nintendo, I fired up my Super Nintendo Classic, and I've been playing Link to the Past lately. So,
excellent.
But Ocarina of Time is maybe my favorite Zelda game of all time. I think it's the best one. There's another Zelda game that is in my honorable mentions. But Ocarina of Time was one of the first sandbox games I ever played, and I didn't even know the term at the time.
It wasn't around at the time. Open world.
Right,
But
yeah, it was an open world game. You didn't have to go fight Ganon or go to the levels. Obviously, if you want to beat the game, yes, you did. But you could explore, and you could go all over Hyrule. They added elements to it that just made it so much bigger and so much grander. Maybe the biggest element being the horse, Epona, or Epona, I don't even know how to say it. But Link got a horse, and you could ride a horse around the land of Hyrule, and it just was a game that, one of the first games I ever remember feeling gigantic. And not just that, but it is an incredible game. I mean, the fighting system is really, really good, where you could target and, shoot your weapons, and there were some magic elements to it. The challenges in the dungeons are always there in Zelda games. Learning different tunes on the ocarina, which is the flute. Just a great, great game. That you can beat and then go on these side quests. Like, there was these little spiders, you had to find like 100 of them, something like that. And I think you actually had to beat the game before you could finish some of those side quests to unlock every weapon and things like that. But just such an awesome game, and I remember spending so much time on this. This is a game that I would beat it and then start it over and play it again. And there's only a few games like that in my lifetime where I don't even care that I've done it all. I want to do it all again. And anytime a game like that pops up for me, it's probably going to make my list. And for me, Zelda is my number 2.
Yeah, I was curious if that was going to be your number 1.
At first it was, but I'll explain how my number 1 to be.
Sure. Ocarina of Time is a game actually I haven't spent a lot of time with. My sister did a little bit. I've watched a little bit of it. As I talked on the Super Nintendo show, Link to the Past is my favorite Zelda game of all time. I stick more to the 2D ones. I like the idea of the 3D ones. I just actually haven't sat down to actually play them, which is an important part of, playing a game. So I can't, I could not rank this one, even though it's got to be pretty high up on that bestsellers. I mean, it was
number 4.
Yeah, it was a 10 out of 10 game. They spent a lot of time on it. It got delayed a lot. They made sure they did it right when it came out. Because again, there weren't day one patches here, so.
Yeah, usually a Zelda game was there at launch, and this one didn't come out for a couple of years after N64 was released.
Yeah, that was a pretty big deal at the time. It goes back to our point when we were talking about the delay. This one got delayed, and that was a big deal, and kind of some kind of hemming and hawing, and people kind of waiting for this to come out. It was worth the wait, but yeah, and they did do another Zelda game then, but Majora's Mask came out still.
Majora's Mask, which some people like better. I don't. It's a really good game, but I think Ocarina of Time is better.
Yeah, they did a nice job here of kind of building it off of the Ocarina of Time engine. So they spent all that time building that engine, and then they used it again, as you should. And so they actually got 2 Zelda games on this system, which was, maybe a callback to Nintendo, but I mean, Super Nintendo didn't have that. So they got 2 out of this, with another completely different adventure. So that was pretty cool. I've not played Majora's Mask either. I don't own that one either. I do have
Majora's Mask is trickier, because it involves wearing these different masks.
Pretty
and
dark,
you find
too.
these different masks. Yeah, it is. And you have to wear different masks to interact with different people, and there's a lot more to it, and it takes more time. So for me, it doesn't have that replay value as much. Let me give you this real quick, just to show how well received Ocarina of Time was on the Wikipedia page. So you could just look this up yourself. But it's got the game ranking scores. Anytime you look up a game, you can see what the ratings it got were. I'm going to read these for Ocarina of Time. Game rankings gave it a 98%. Metacritic, 99 out of 100. 5 stars from Allgame. 5 stars from GamePro. Edge, EGM, both give it 10 out of 10. GameSpot gives it 10 out of 10. IGN, 10 out of 10. Game Trailers, 10 out of 10. Nintendo Power, so Nintendo itself, 9.5 out of 10. They're the only non-10. It won Game of the Year, greatest game of all time, in Entertainment Weekly. Nintendo Power called it the greatest game of all time, even though they didn't give it a 10. It's just a game that still, to this day, people just sing the praises of.
And they have remade it a little bit. You can get it for the 3DS, and you can get it on any virtual console that they put out. The 3DS remake is pretty good, from what I've gathered.
I haven't played it.
So,
haven't played it.
To be able to play a portable Nintendo 64 game like that, kind of revamped. So I thought that was a cool thing about that library, that they brought some of those 64 games over like that. And Majora's Mask was released for the 3DS too.
Yes.
So ease of playing nowadays. So that was a great pick there at number 2. So my number 2 is, now we're going to get into wrestling talk, because I've already told you what my number 1 is. So, and again, so it's from a defining standpoint. If you want to talk about hours I spent on a game, it's going to be the THQ Aki games for the Nintendo 64. And so I would say that, if I have to list one for the number 2, because I like to cheat and say like all of them, or in this order, like, I'm going to say, it's really hard for me to rank them. I'm going to say No Mercy number 1, only for how deep it was, and for all the different story modes and the different offshoots you could do, like going for the, you could lose a match and it would send you down a different path. And like, I made sure like I 100%ed like every belt and every quest in that game. So I had every scenario. I saw everything in that game. I wouldn't say the unlockables were that great, and I'm probably mixing. I remember WrestleMania 2000, again, another fantastic game. I remember that one having like Shawn Michaels in it, but him not being very good, which is really disappointing. And I think it was Andre, right? Andre the Giant was in No Mercy. If you beat to the end of it.
I know he was in my number 1, which is a wrestling game. I'll just share that now. Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, the Japanese sport. I know he was in that.
Cool. We're gonna talk about all the wrestling games here at once. So let me give you guys a quick chronological trip back here. So WCW NWO World Tour was end of '97, or November '97. So again, the system came out in '96. You think about the popularity of WCW. And this game comes out in the end of '97. So I became a wrestling fan in the beginning of '98, really. So, but I saw World Tour in the spring of '98, like at a friend's house, and like other people playing. I didn't play it, but I was kind of like, oh, I'm into wrestling. Oh, this looks cool. But because I didn't have a Nintendo 64 yet, really with access to so then WCW NWO Revenge came out in October '98. So I was pretty into wrestling, but I'm playing like Warzone and stuff. And then this game came out in '98, and then so I remember with Revenge in like the spring of '99, like buying it because my brother had a Nintendo 64, and so it had been probably discounted and used at that point for a little bit. For some reason, I didn't have I don't know if it was my age or like the means or whatever. Like I didn't have like the urgency to get that, but I'll never forget the with WrestleMania 2000. Like checking IGN every day for like the wrestler that they were announcing for the game, and like watching the entrance video, and like the countdown for that was like months until its release. I've never been more engaged with a game before launch than WrestleMania 2000, which was November 2000 that came out. Now your game, Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, your number 1 was
that's kind of in between.
Yeah, it's January 2000, so it's like technically the WrestleMania 2000 engine, but I think like a little bit built up already, but not as good as No Mercy.
There's some stuff in Virtual Pro that's not in Mania 2000 that is in No Mercy.
Right. So it is kind of like, yeah, exactly. That's the right way to put it. And the original Virtual Pro Wrestling actually came out around the same time as World Tour did. It was like late '97. So in Japan, they went 2 years without a release of a game, which was a lot of time back then. So we got them every year.
All of these games are great, though.
Well, yeah, they were all great, and they it hit a moment with fandom with me too, where we were just so engaged with the products, and that when we found out that THQ was going to get the WWF license, it was just wow. And I like Revenge a lot. I thought about kind of leading with Revenge here. Obviously, it was limited a little bit in some different things you could do. I mean, you could go for the belts. It didn't have maybe like running grapples and some other things like that. But you know what? The game is still really good, and I think the AI is so good in it. Still, you crank that difficulty up, and you can even move like the sliders up a little bit, so guys have even a little bit more endurance. That screen before you select points. If you move those up all the way, you can have like a really great 20-minute match that's back and forth, and like everybody's spirits going up at the same time, and you're getting your Rana's getting countered into a power bomb, or your like top moves getting reversed. It's like, wow, like this is amazing for the end of '98. I think I'm more impressed with that game in '98 maybe than like the ones later on, but like it was just not more impressed than what they could do, but just for the time period, like that game was just amazing. What were your memories of the early WCW ones?
So, Revenge was definitely the more popular in my household because it is a better game, but also too in terms of times of when it came out. At this point, I was fully back into my fandom, as well as basically everyone I knew. Talking about staying up all night with friends and playing video games. I have a very distinct memory of playing Revenge. I've been married to my wife for 16 years now. And our relationship almost ended before it really started because of WCW NWO Revenge, which she bought for me. But so just to tell the story, and I'll tell my version of it because she's not going to listen. She was sick. We were dating. She was sick, so I put her to bed and said I was going home. And I decided instead of going home to go over to my friend's house, and we called a few guys up. We started playing Revenge, and before I knew it, it was 3 a.m. And all of a sudden, the telephone rings. It was my mother, because I had not come home, and this is before cell phones and things like that, and I didn't bother to call. Last thing she knew, I was at my girlfriend's house, so she was freaking out thinking I'd stayed the night there. And then when they found out that I had left hours ago, apparently my sick girlfriend had gotten out of bed and was driving the path between my house and hers up and down, looking for my car in a ditch.
Did your parents call her to ask like where you were? Is that what spurred this?
Because I had not shown up to come home, so they called her. She's like, he left hours ago, so I freaked everybody out.
Yes, this is what happens, kids. This is why movies nowadays, a lot of movies back then could be solved with a cell phone, but we didn't have that option.
Right, guys, you can get dumped over this. Trust me. Like the next day when I saw her, she walked in the room and threw a handwritten note expressing her great displeasure with me, but if I could do it all again, I'd do it. Because,
it was just a miscommunication. Like you said, it was your mom's fault. Blame your mother.
I know. Like you said, these 4-player matches, man, where we do tags, and you said, I don't know how they did it in the engine, but no wrestling game ever has been able to replicate the near falls like these games did.
Yep.
Kicking out at 2.9 was just... You'd have a crowd watching, and people would be like, "Oh!" It was like watching a legitimate wrestling match. Sometimes, you'd get us invested, and we'd be so excited. And but yeah, that's my first memory of WCW was that I always think of that night, and I remember specifically my friend Terry and I. We were Benoit and Malenko, and we made it to the finals of our tag tournament that we all had that night. So. Nice. Again, I almost lost my marriage, but I also almost won that tournament.
Yeah,
so
boy, imagine
it might be worth it. But yeah, like you said, everything you said with each game, it kind of got better. My number one is Virtual Pro Wrestling. Not that I think it's hands down better than No Mercy, because I think each game has slightly better features. No Mercy has the ladder match, which Virtual Pro Wrestling does not. No Mercy has a few other things that Virtual Pro Wrestling does not. Virtual Pro Wrestling, I think, has a deeper roster. and has more creative stuff, you could put masks on your creative wrestlers. Right. So for that, I kind of picked that as my number one because of the roster. And again, as a defining moment, this is a game that I played for years and years and years. The only reason I don't still play it is because I don't have a working N64 controller, which I could go out and buy. But anytime I fire it up, I will print up a bracket, fill in some guys, and give myself a little tournament. I'd play this game one player for hours. Yes, it's fun to play with friends, but I would play this game by myself over and over and over again. Because there's that challenge. Like you said, you just turn up the meters, and, this isn't me to brag about me being good at video games. I think most people who can play video games, it's kind of challenging to play the computer in the sense that you're always going to win. Whereas with these games, they made it difficult enough to where you really had to try and win sometimes.
Sure. Sometimes you had to be cheap. Like I remember the end of WrestleMania 2000, like The Undertaker was really, really hard. He was like a super boss in that game. And I remember playing as Austin through, because that's just who you were going to play as. And like you would just be cheap, like you'd hang outside or try to like get him counted out or something, or like I remember too, like some of those games where like you had to advance like a handicap match. And you just try to like get them counted out, and then you'd win and move through because it was too hard. Because they keep breaking them up and everything. Yeah, they were tough. Now, did you have with Virtual Pro Wrestling? I had those two games too. I've played two a little bit. Did you ever like follow like a translation guide and like edit the names in? So yours is.
Oh yeah, I printed it out. Like it was. This is back when internet was taking up your phone time. Sure. So I had to go online and print a 70-page guide. Step by step, and rename each player and tweak what they look like to make them look right. But yeah, so basically I believe it's an All Japan video game. So the All Japan guys are there as Misawa, as Kobashi, but then you've got New Japan guys, and they're just changed a little bit. You've got legends like the Funks and Abdul the Butcher. You've got Andres in there. You've got even like Pancrase and Pride and Rings, Michinoku Pro. Just like many wrestling promotions. It would be like if No Mercy had, okay, here's WCW, here's Lex Luger, but we named him Brett Luger. You know what I mean? And you just had to change what he looks like, but his moveset's already in there for you. But yeah, I did all that. I figured out how to unlock every guy, and
there's a lot of unlockables in that game. And we talked before about how I loved it in Mario Golf, and so that would be. It was once it was done. Obviously the replay factor was either simulating and playing like against the computer to fantasy book your own thing. I remember like doing write-ups and then like playing the computer, and like that was the match. And so, but there were unlockables in there too. But I remember looking at like Virtual Pro, they have a ton of wrestlers to unlock in that game, 20 or so.
There's like 7. Yeah, and that's with a roster that starts with like 50 guys. So you start with 50, and there's like 20 unlockables. It's really wild. Deep in terms of who's out there, and there's movesets to create guys too, that aren't even in the game. So, but gosh, what a great couple of games. Couple other things that these games introduced, like you mentioned Andre, and I think the reason we both think of Andre is because they had weight detection.
Yes.
So you couldn't body slam Andre. Yep. I think Andre might have been the only one you couldn't slam, but. Still, it was maybe Big Show on No Mercy. You couldn't body slam. You couldn't power bomb until like you hit your finish.
Game, right? Wasn't that the trick that he was sent down? So he wasn't. You could create him though. I remember I created him pretty easy. They had all this stuff in there, but he actually was not on the roster.
That's surprising.
I remember some weird quirks like poor Raven, like his finisher, like no one ever sold it. It's like you do like the even flow DT and it just pop up. It's like what? It's some weird glitch in the game. Like you couldn't beat anybody with it. So
right. I also remember No Mercy and Virtual Pro were the only two that had this, where certain guys had like the super mega death kill finishers. Like you had your standard finishers, but then if you did a taunt while your finisher was on, you could unlock the mega finish. Like if you're Kenta Kobashi, you get your finisher, and that would be the orange bomb. But if you went for the mega finisher, you could do a burning hammer, and you could only do it once per match, which I thought was just such a really cool.
Now I don't remember that being in No Mercy.
It was for just a couple guys, and I think it was a little different in the sense that I don't think it was just once per match. I'd have to look up who you could do it with, but like maybe like Taker, it would be like the Last Ride or the Tombstone, something like that.
I remember you could steal finishers in those ones too, and that was pretty cool to do like the reverse on the analog stick and do their finisher instead, because that was all the rage back then was finisher kickouts and doing your opponent's finisher. So I remember I did all the renaming on I'm going to talk about Revenge again real quick. So I did all the renaming on Revenge, which you can find online. Although I do find it, excuse me, very curious why they think that Aki-Man is Misawa. Do you know why this is? Because I played this. I've never seen him do a shooting star press. I don't know why.
I don't either.
That's like, I don't know if it's GameFAQs lore from the late 90s. It's fun to go back to GameFAQs and search for those games, because you're really going in a time warp of like 20 years ago. And then you see stuff updated in 06, and you're like, oh, that was recent. And you're like, no, actually, that was 12 years ago also. It was all the rage back then, like people using ASCII text and like these huge text files uploaded for that. And they're still out there.
Yeah, I think Aki-Man was Misawa because I'm pretty sure he did the Tiger Driver, but it was more like he was just like a highlight reel of all Japanese guys, because he did everybody.
You know what I mean? Like, he was pretty cool. But I remember like Kibashi's in there too, and Kawada. And then when you pull,
Taue was the Frankenstein guy.
Guy. Those guys match up pretty well to the finishers in there, and you can rename them, but you can't change their appearance, unfortunately. But then when you graduate to virtual pro wrestling too, and then you see all those guys in their glory and Misawa coming down to the ring and stuff, it's pretty powerful. It's pretty cool. And so the countdown to, I'm going to tell you a funny story too. So the countdown to WrestleMania 2000 was a big deal, right? So checking IGN every day. This is the fall of '99. And I'll never forget its release day was on a Friday. And the Thursday before, we had gone out, typical Thursday night college drinking night. Like I remember like my one roommate who was a bigger dude, like scoop slamming me on like gravel too, which was a fun memory. And so the next day, Friday night, again, it's the fall of college or whatever. And I remember being like, I'm going to get this game at Walmart down the city close to where I was at school. And I'm not going out that night. And I'm not saying there was like peer pressure or anything or anybody fought me on it, but it was kind of like, oh, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, no, I want to stay here and play it. And wouldn't that be the night that all of them got busted for underage drinking? And if I would have been there, I would have too, even just for a little bit. Like this happened to be the house they went to, and I didn't. And so I managed to, and it never happened to me. And so I staying home and playing that game, staying in our we had like a on-campus 6-person apartment, and staying home and playing that saved me from who knows what, so.
Yeah, think about it. These games had a direct influence on our futures, both of us.
That one did for sure. I mean, you never, I'm not saying I would have turned to a life of crime, but it certainly would have been awkward conversations and, who changes what. And then, I got a house the next year, but fortunately I turned 21 then. And so, I don't know if that wouldn't have happened or how my parents would have responded. So it was a huge relief and like a wow, thank you game. So so that was 2000, which came out in October 99. And then No Mercy, I remember, again too, I remember skipping class and going like that morning as soon as GameStop opened, I had reserved it and bringing it back. And that was the game that had, some people unfortunately had like the saving didn't work, so you had to get a replacement, and that was always hit or miss when you bought used. And I was fortunate, I never had to. I still have my same one. And about that game too was that the unlockables where you earn money and then you had to buy them, which is another trick to like.
You could buy the hoe.
Yeah, you could buy the hoe and Ken Shamrock, and and I remember too, that was another thing that hooked me in. So I can't imagine like if I played like Fortnite when I was like 20 years old, when it comes to like getting things and upgrading. But in this game, it was, I'm going to play this until I make enough money to buy every character and everything in the game. So that's where those gaming behaviors.
I forgot about that.
That's where gamization and all that, gamification and all that stuff came from. Where those kind of desires or things with your brain and whatnot. So.
I mean, I could talk about this for another 2 hours.
I
These games.
think maybe we'll kind of talk to. So obviously, a lot of people always want like this series to come back, and like the controls were pretty flawless. So we talked about that controller before, but it worked well on the Nintendo 64.
It was perfect for these games.
It was perfect for them, and it was kind of never emulated again. Although I will say, maybe a controversial take is that WrestleMania 19 on the GameCube, I always felt that was like the only. I know people like Day of Reckoning and stuff on the GameCube were kind of like these games, but not really. But THQ made WrestleMania 18 and WrestleMania 19, which are awful names for video games, on the GameCube. Sure. And they were a little glitchy and spotty, but I remember playing 19, and while the hit detection was awful, like I remember thinking, like, this is really close to No Mercy. Like, I don't know if just people really weren't into GameCube, because then you have another system that really looks like a kid's system, and but I always thought that game was kind of close to it. And then, but people have got creative, with ROMs, and you can play classic WWF, rosters, and that stuff is still online. And you go to like a gaming convention or anything like that, and they have No Mercy tournaments still. And so you talked about the spectator aspect of people like erupting over big kickouts, stuff like that. That still goes on today. They're pretty popular. You get quite a few people to sign up and play No Mercy tournaments. And
you show me where the virtual pro wrestling tournament is, and I will show up and I will win it as John Akiyama. I will win that thing.
To your wife, it's like Rounders. Like you quit the game, but you have to go back and you're like, I need to go do this. Drive 20 hours to play it. Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 tournament.
Yeah, Jun was my go-to on Virtual Pro. If I was playing somebody else, I could always win with Jun. I think because the finisher was the Exploder Suplex, so it was like almost a guaranteed delivery. It was harder to reverse for whatever reason. But
yeah, so those games were a ton of fun, and people are going to wax nostalgic about them, and I still think they hold up today. I played a really nice La Parka versus Chris Jericho match earlier today on Revenge, and again, you crank it up to hard, man. And they're reversing top rope moves. Everybody's spirits moving up at the same time. Like we get finishers like within each other. Like it really structures like a good wrestling match. It's not. And then I played some Virtual Pro Wrestling 2. Played Misawa versus Vader, and Vader had me down pretty good early, and like I was turning like blue, and made a big comeback, and hit the Dragon Suplex and the Tiger
just
Driver.
Like Misawa would have done.
And I won, and it was like, this is just like what wrestling was. They did a great job of capturing it. So, and I think it really played to like our imagination, because we watched it and then you wanted to relive it, right? Like I used to watch sports and then go outside and play them, and this would be like I watch wrestling and then it's like, what, I'm going to play my own Sold Out, and the rosters are so deep. Like Revenge had a ton of wrestlers. World Tour, no, but Revenge had a ton of guys that you could really mess around with and, come up with.
Well, that's like, even into adulthood. I mean, because by the time I got Virtual Pro Wrestling, this is probably 99. So I'm 20 years old at this point, or maybe it's 2000 even. So I'm 21 years old. This is not like me as a teenager anymore,
right.
I remember taking this game over to my friend Nate's house, who is actually a professional wrestler, Nate Matson, and we had our own league. We had our own guys, and they had kind of like a pay-per-view type thing, and we kept track of who had the belt, so we didn't even have to keep track because it kept track for you.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we ran our own promotion for months and months. I did
a lot of that with I think Mania 2000 was the first one that did that, where you could have belts and you could unlock the Smoking Skull belt, and then you could defend that, and that was really cool, really really cool. And I should say too, with No Mercy, obviously the ladder matches were incredibly unique. Putting people on like the announce table and doing moves off them to destroy the table was, I don't think they did that in Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, but that was another reason why you needed that expansion pack, because that game was a dog if you had multiple people on the screen, because so much stuff built into it.
Right. Well, and where you could kind of screw yourself over is, I don't know if it was the expansion pack or the memory card where it would save your data. But with one of these games, it was either Mania 2000 or No Mercy, I had like my custom belts on one thing, and I lost that memory card, and so the belt basically vanished from the game. So I just could never fight for that belt.
Yeah, it was on your memory card. Yeah, some stuff they did require slots on there.
Yeah, so So be careful. I guess if you emulate it, you don't have to deal with that. But if you want to go the traditional route of actually the original system with the cartridge, make sure you do it right.
Now, were you a big Create a Wrestler guy too?
Yes. With Virtual Pro, I had the guide that just said, "Here's how you make this guy or that guy." But I remember going back around then. I remember making a really good Lance Storm, a really good Booker T. And then I make my own guys, just goofy stuff. But Booker T and Lance Storm were probably the two that I made the best versions of.
Yeah, I remember with No Mercy being like real meticulous on like those CAW sites where I wanted like the roster to be like exactly what the WWF's roster was at that time in the fall of 2000. So I remember, I remember the even tweaking them myself. I never like made myself with like souped up moves. My one roommate, they would do that because maybe they played more like multiplayer. I mean, I did, but I never played like, here's me as my souped up, all these moves guy versus your guy. Like I never really did that. I did more for like the simulation game aspect to it.
Although we did put my friend Nate in because he was a legitimate independent professional wrestler, so we made him. I will say this too. I think the Creator Wrestlers peaked at that era because of the blocky look. If I play like WWE 18 now and I try to create a wrestler, it doesn't look anything like the other wrestlers in the game. There's just like, it's so hard to do it right. I just wind up downloading what other people create.
Yeah, especially nowadays.
Apparently are professionals at this.
Yeah, I did a little bit of that with some of the recent WWE 2K games. And so what you're doing is you're just taking advantage of people that have a lot more time on their hands.
Right, because my guys always look like Sloth from the Goonies. Right. So,
Yeah, I think it did peak in that. Certainly in my interest. I mean, I remember doing it like in WWF Attitude and then up through No Mercy. I had quite a few slots filled with. They still do. You put it in. I mean, they're still saved on there, which is pretty cool. And then some other quick wrestling just on the Nintendo 64. I remember that we were remiss to mention this on our last show was WCW Mayhem for PS1. And now, so yes, I would also groan with it. If you ever, the characters look like Baron Corbin, short arms, stocky, no neck, like it's a bad look. And so, but it was interesting at the time. So thinking back to then, was it like EA picked up the WCW license because so THQ got WWF and that was like a huge deal. But who was going to make a game after Revenge? And EA was going to make it. So we were pretty optimistic of it. And again, it had a ton of stuff you could do to unlock, which was cool. Like a lot of guys to unlock in it. But it didn't really hit home. I had played it on the PlayStation, and I think I may have made a mistake with that. I played it a little bit on Nintendo 64 before this call, before our show here, and not with the intent to list it by any means, but I guess was kind of like, I wonder how this looks. It certainly was souped up with, little video. The audio was much better, and they probably got the most out of it with EA. But
I believe I had this for PlayStation, actually.
Yeah, I had it for PlayStation. I never had it for Nintendo 64 until I probably picked it up at some, I think it honestly was I bought a holder. It's like black holder that holds Nintendo 64 games are kind of hard to organize, right? And it's one of those shells you can pull out, and I think it was in there. And I thought it was unique because Rey Mysterio is unmasked in that game. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Oh, okay.
So it was a 2000 WCW game, and if you listen to our friend Nate, WCW 2000 is no good, but they did make a video game of it, and so and with a pretty good roster, I guess. That was we didn't get into Backstage Assault or any of the other ones, but all those other Attitude ones were all on Nintendo 64 too. But this is all about THQ and their games. So
yeah. I think WCW's path in video games just summarizes their path as a whole. In '98 they had the license, they were the top dog, and then all of a sudden WWF steals it from them, and then it went downhill real fast.
Yep, it did.
Ugh.
Well, that was your number one, and my number one was Super Mario 64, which I talked about before. Sure. Now, so some honorable mentions real quick. We didn't talk about Mario Kart, and it was really close to being on my list with GoldenEye. It was hard because I saw it, I played Battle Mode, but I don't remember spending as much time as I did with those other games on it, so I didn't feel like it would be fair to list it over them. But we talked a little bit on the Super Nintendo call about how like we didn't play Mario Kart for that system. I think Mario Kart 64 is fantastic. I think it holds up still today, and obviously set the groundwork for when we get to later systems. I do think some of the most recent Mario Kart.
Yes, Mario Kart will rank on another system for me easily.
But what were your thoughts on that?
For Mario Kart 64, yeah, like you said, it still holds up, and I think it almost hurts in the sense that I have fonder memories of different versions of the game. Yeah. Simple as that. It's not that it's a bad game, but I prefer other versions of it, and I'll talk about that when we get there.
Some of the other ones that I had then too. So Smash Brothers debuted on Nintendo 64 too. I remember that we had that.
Yep.
And I remember being intrigued by it, and it was a smaller roster, which kind of goes back to our talking points that we had with Street Fighter 2 and stuff. Sometimes it's quaint in that it's like these 10 guys, but I never played it a ton where I have it still, but it didn't hit me. I like the series, but I was never a hardcore player of it.
Yeah, I looked up a little bit on it because I thought maybe you'd rank it, but I never owned it for N64. So, and this is another game that will certainly rank on a future system for me. Yes. So, but I think N64 is kind of the start of some of these. Even though Mario Kart started with Super Nintendo, I feel like N64 is where I first played it. Smash Brothers starts here. Pokemon games kind of, well, I guess they start on the handheld, but this is their first console release. Yep. The Mario sports games, as we talked about a little bit. Mario Party games are on here. Yeah. Which didn't make my list, not even probably on my honorable mentions, although I like the Mario Party games. They're a lot of fun. A lot of current stuff can be traced back to the N64, I think.
And so one of the things with kart racers too is that some other names that I jotted down, like Diddy Kong Racing, was made by Rare.
I remember that one.
So they made after GoldenEye, they made a racing game, and they actually made kart racing was all the rage back then. We talked a little bit about that on the PlayStation show, and there were quite a few on Nintendo 64 too. And I thought the system did pretty well with it. There were other ones like Lego Racers, and kind of like a little known one was Mickey's Speedway USA, which was a Rare game.
Oh, okay.
So Rare went from Diddy Kong, which I thought was like a little bit slow. And it was cool because it was like planes and boats or whatever, but it wasn't as cool as you think it would be. And certainly not in certain, later iterations of Mario Kart. But they actually made another racing game with a Disney license, which was much better. Essentially, it's Mario Kart skinned as Disney, but Rare made it. So it was pretty good. The kart racing was pretty good. And then one of the things I thought that Nintendo 64 did well too was arcade games, and namely Midway. So we talked about NFL Blitz last time. Didn't make my list for this system, but it was actually nearly arcade perfect on the Nintendo 64, which sounds weird, but it was. And San Francisco Rush was another game that's going to make my honorable mentions. That was a racing game by Midway where you could take damage during the game, and it was a really good racing game, and it translated really well to the Nintendo 64.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. San Francisco Rush. I'd have to Google that. One of my honorable mentions that I talked about earlier in the episode. One of the first releases that doesn't really hold up as a great game, but in terms of racing, was Wave Race.
That's a great game.
Wave Race is an honorable mention for me. That I don't really know why I would put it over other games other than when I think of Nintendo 64, Wave Race comes to mind. It was one of the first games, and it's basically just, jet skis.
But it was, Nintendo made that game too, and it was, you could tell. I mean, the water physics and stuff were so cool. It's a beautiful game. Mm-hmm. Really good game. Wave Race 64. That's a good one to throw in here. We had Jet Moto on the PlayStation, but I never really played Wave Race, but when I did, I was like, wow, this is much better. Pretty well received too.
Yep. I think was there an Excite Bike for the 64?
That was a great game. That was another game that did really well for this, or reviewed really well too. I've not played it. I do own it.
Yeah.
And some other ones.
I mean, of course, I had Excite Bike for the original.
Yes, I do as well. I had a lot of memories of that one. And other games that kind of went into that Mario 64 mold, but this goes back to Rare again. So we talked a little bit about Donkey Kong 64, which was like a collectathon, but Rare also made Banjo-Kazooie, and Banjo-Tooie for the Nintendo 64. And I played those games actually more when they were 360 like digital releases, like perfect ports of that game with no loading and could do all the frames per second. But they were really great, kind of open world collect. Like, go into this world, do these tasks, get these things to open this thing. Like, they were great games. Banjo-Kazooie is one I definitely wanted to mention.
I always felt like Banjo-Kazooie was what Crash Bandicoot wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Like, or just in this, maybe in the feel of it, I don't know. We talked about Crash a little bit last episode. Crash is a game that I just don't have real fond memories of, and maybe just because there was some of that up and down style, with Banjo-Kazooie, but
yeah, it was kind of like that third-person open world type thing that you saw maybe a little bit in Zelda and with Mario and stuff, and just it was kind of like a 3D it was platforming to an extent. That was a really good series, which you can play elsewhere. What other games did you have on your honorable mention?
I've already briefly mentioned Perfect Dark, which I feel is kind of like a spiritual sequel to GoldenEye. If you like GoldenEye and you want to replay it for the quality, I'd suggest skipping it and just playing Perfect Dark because I think it is a better game. Majora's Mask, the other Zelda game, is a great, great game that just didn't make my list. But one that was kind of as an honorable mention, never really threatened to crack my top 4, but I really liked, and it's cool that you listed Mario Golf, was, for me, I had Mario Tennis.
I was going to talk about that one,
listed. Yeah, okay. Mario Tennis was really good, too, and I think we've just kind of unpacked a little bit about these Mario sports games that they always got it right. I can't think of a Mario sports game where I'm like, well, this one sucked. And I believe Mario Tennis is coming to the Switch soon.
Yes.
And that's a game I'm probably going to be picking up because I saw that and I'm like, oh man, I loved Mario Tennis.
Tennis even made its way to the Wii U with Ultra Smash, a game I played just a handful of times.
I didn't have that. I did not have that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but that's another game that got really good reviews. I didn't look it up, but that was a really well.
Yeah, I was into that one. I remember buying it new, which is like a big deal at the time because I had been like scouring like video rental stores and stuff where they would put pre-owned games for sale and like try to get the best deals because again we didn't have we were college kids, so but I remember getting that one and just never got as into it as golf. I wanted it to be like golf. It was fine, like the physics were cool, and I think I just like golf more than tennis. And since then I really haven't played too many of the other tennis ones. I mean, they had the Wii one. Well, the Wii one was the GameCube one reskinned with the motion controls. And then the and then the Wii U game that came out with it, and they've had ones on the 3DS and whatnot, but I actually haven't played too much of that. But yeah, Mario Tennis was another.
Gosh, we may have to do a Mario Sports edition.
I'm gonna have to play a bunch of them because I do like that baseball game on the Wii actually.
The Super Sluggers, that's an excellent game.
That's for sure.
Yeah, that's good. And their soccer game on the Wii is really good too. The Super Strikers, I believe it's called. That's another good one. So
interesting.
But yeah, it's funny. This is probably my shortest list. I have my 4 and then just like 4 or 5 on my honorable mentions. But I think that's because the N64 library is pretty small. Yeah. We talked about it at the top of the show. It just wasn't a real deep roster of games.
Yeah, I think there were only like, I don't know, 300? Less than 300 in the U.S. I don't know. It wasn't that much. There were some other ones later on that Mega Man 64 Bomberman was out there.
Bomberman, wow.
I remember Shadow of the Empire, the Star Wars game that was out there. That was a game I played early on. I never owned it. Or I did own it later, but like at the time it was like, oh, Star Wars. But then it was like, who's this guy? Where's Han Solo? Like,
yeah, it wasn't even a guy.
Yeah, I guess the game was okay, but I couldn't. I'm not sure how good that game was in hindsight. But while we waited for other games, but
quick Google says his name was Dash Rendar.
Dash Rendar.
Just even a good name, that even sounds like a made-up name
anymore. He's probably gone away.
I doubt it. So, it is one of the top-selling games, though. It's in the top 20.
I believe it because it was pretty early in the system's release, and there just wasn't a lot of options out there. So, it always felt like,
and it came out before the prequel.
Yeah, it was really like a standalone, like before Empire, maybe. Like it kind of sits on its own land. So. And
And even too, coming off the Super Nintendo, which wasn't our last episode, but it's the last Nintendo system. Nintendo had the 3 Star Wars movie games that were so good for Super Nintendo, and then you have this, and it's.
No, I will say that one game that you talked about earlier with the bundle, the Episode 1 Racer, that's actually a really good game. Now, I think it's best on the Dreamcast, which isn't like that hot of a take. It came out for all the systems at the time. It was best on the Dreamcast, probably okay on Nintendo 64, and then not great on the PlayStation at that point, like technology-wise, was hanging behind. But that was not a bad racer by any means, actually. Interesting enough. Kind of, again, skinned with that license where you're like, this is a lame part of a not good movie, so...
Sure.
Didn't pick up, but there were some other ones that I didn't even see that I guess were related to Episode 1 that came out for the system too that I have actually not played. So,
Okay. So let's looking at the list. Couple games we didn't mention. I mean, all the top selling games we've at least mentioned. Outside of the top 10, the only one in the top 10 we didn't talk about is Star Fox, and I was just never a Star Fox guy.
Yeah, I wasn't either. It was another one of those ones where we talked about in the Super Nintendo show how it kind of like it was good tech for the time but didn't really hold up. And then this one, I did not play it. I just didn't get into it. And it was a pretty early game in the system too, actually. It was like early 97, mid 97 maybe. No, maybe it was fall 97. It was in 97 there before.
It was 97.
April. Okay, so spring 97. And I remember doing pretty well. I'm not surprised it's on that best-selling list because, again, like the lack of titles. But I never really got into it and played it. Actually, that was another one from the 64 that got released. I played it more on the 3DS. It was fine. That kind of genre was always one I thought I'd like the X-Wing kind of like space shooter mission one, but I guess...
Sure.
Ultimately, no.
So let me ask you a question that you might know the answer to. Why did we never get a Metroid game for the N64?
Well, that's a... Yeah, I want to say...
Because you've got Mario, you've got Zelda. I think those are the 1-2 punch for Nintendo. But I think Metroid is up there in terms of Nintendo exclusive
Metroid
titles.
made a big push in the next system. So I think some things that came into play here were Nintendo 64 sales were fine, but at the same time it was like this technology, like we need to move. So games that were being developed for it late in its system, which is were pushed to the GameCube. So
that makes sense.
I want to say that that's probably why. I know that I'm trying to think of the other games now that were too. Maybe like Luigi's Mansion was supposed to be Nintendo 64 maybe at first, and then they just pushed it.
Oh, such a fun game.
They pushed it and then put it out for the GameCube. Stuff like that I think is what really played into it, is that they got Ocarina out and then Majora's Mask, and they were looking at the next console.
Sure. Would you consider Metroid maybe the number 3 Nintendo name behind Mario and Zelda? I mean, Mario covers so much because then you got Mario Kart and then you got Mario Sports, and I mean maybe Castlevania, Donkey Kong, yeah. But I feel like whatever you pick third is a big gap behind.
Yeah,
Mario
for sure. Because Metroid, I mean, people say the same thing about like F-Zero, right? They haven't made one of those games in a while.
Sure. Yep. Even Star Fox, or maybe Kirby.
Kirby got a lot of Kirby got a lot of play on the Kirby 64 was a game we didn't mention it here. Kirby got a lot of play then on the Wii. There's a racing game on the GameCube.
Yeah, there's a real fun couple of Kirby games on the Wii.
Sure, they'll be on my list when we get there. I think so.
Awesome.
But yeah, cool. So anything else on that top 15 list names that we didn't think of?
I mean, there's more Pokemon games. There's Pokemon Stadium, Pokemon Snap, which I think that just speaks to the popularity of Pokemon, because if I remember right, that was just taking pictures of Pokemon. Yeah, it's really stupid, but it was so popular. I mean, Pokemon was a big deal if you were the right age for it. Wave Race in the top 15. And then Yoshi's Story.
Yeah, that was another kind of an experiment type game coming off of Yoshi's Island, which I talked about in the Super Nintendo show that didn't do particularly well, or isn't held in too high regard nowadays.
Yeah, I don't even remember this game, to be honest. I couldn't tell you anything about it.
The only thing I remember having a Japanese version of it, which is weird. Like my friend had imported it, And I remember that
okay.
you really had to read the manual and understand like what this collecting and like getting certain things did towards like the whole story or like the ending. So it was like a little confusing, and if you just picked it up and were like, this is kind of lame. But I remember listening to a podcast, it may have been a Retronauts show about this game that kind of talked about some of the the different meaning. Like if you kind of understand more what the game's trying to do, it kind of makes it a lot better. But I have not tried that one myself.
Yeah. Then the only other thing in there is Mario Party, which we talked about briefly. The first Mario
I didn't
Party,
play
maybe.
those until the Wii as like a party game.
Same here.
So
same here. Well, actually, I might have had a GameCube one. But yeah, the Wii is where I really got into it with my kids, because that was a game that an adult can play with a child very easily and loosely.
Yep. Yeah,
So-
it's one of the ones I actually have 1 and 2 for the Nintendo 64 with the express purpose of one day playing them with my daughter. Like just thinking like these are going to be
And she'll
so
probably win.
basic, and like this controller is big enough to be able to, you're not handling like a Wii remote or something like that. Like we could play it. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it. There's some games on there that are not really worth discussing. So.
well, next up, Jordan, you know where we're going next?
I do.
It is going to be
We're going back to Sega,
We're going
correct?
to Sega for one last time. It's going to be a fun show. The Dreamcast is one that I have very fond memories of. And so, we're going to head to the Dreamcast. And then one day there'll be some lost episode of Portables and whatnot. We'll get there. We'll figure it out. But yeah.
Along with Mario Sports games.
Well, we've already begun planning, right? Eventually we're going to come to the end of these consoles, so we want to keep this series going because we're enjoying it. And and so maybe we'll go to the Mario Sports games and some other like little offshoot lists that we can talk through to drum up memories and whatnot for the different systems. So, anything else you want to add in there?
No, other than N64 is a great system that I have great memories of.
I agree.
And even though I was very good at it, I'm glad that I stayed married to my wife.
Yes. Your children are also the fabric of time and whatnot would have been
believe I made the right
changed had you decided to go pro with WCW and NWO Revenge all those years ago. And so we all make choices, and sometimes they work out in different ways. So that was a great little anecdote. So yeah, I will say too that I do think it holds up real well. And again, a lot of the best games in the system are always going to be available. Nintendo will have them on either the 3DS or the DS, or you can get them on the Virtual Console. But the system itself holds up well. Mine's working well. I was just playing.
Ironically enough, it's the wrestling games that you probably aren't going to find.
Yeah, license-wise, anything license-wise isn't going to make its way over, which, some of those hidden gems may not make it out, and the wrestling ones, they won't. But you can find them almost anywhere pretty dirt cheap. They sold a ton of those. So they're still around, that's for sure. Keep them, again, use your isopropyl alcohol, 90% or more, and and a Q-tip, and keep them clean to keep those pins clean.
I thought you were going to say take your IsoPro.
No, that slipped in my head when I started to say it, which is why I kind of stuttered through it. But you can always clean. People ask, "Oh, this game doesn't work." You can always. All it takes is a Q-tip and a little rubbing alcohol, and or first aid antiseptic to clean out those pins. So. All right, well, we will see you guys next time. Again, share us your thoughts on the Nintendo 64 and your forward-defining games for the system. There was a lot to cover. There's some really good ones here for sure. And next time, we will see you guys, and we will talk about the Sega Dreamcast.
All right, take care.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us. and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We offer them to you on 2 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, along with Main Event, Survey Says, the Monday Night Wars, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction show, as well as Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network podcasts and pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Match of the Week podcast, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Through the Years, Worldcast, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Center Stage, and Letters from Kayfabe, plus much more. And on our very popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, NBA Team, PTBN Play, Sunday Groove, Breaking Balls, and Lucha Undead.
As well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans.
With the hard-traveling fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversations, Geek and Sassy, and Marvel Age Podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback today. All these shows, plus others, available at PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, and thehistoryofwrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.